Yeah, hi everyone. So Philip Deladakis is my name. I'm Victoria's Minister for Innovation and the Digital Economy, and it's my great pleasure to host three amazing people from the tech community here at home and they're overseas, or they're overseas and here at home. We're part of a global community, and welcome today.
Hi, I'm Rachel Newman, and I'm chair of the board of Startup Oz, which is Australia's leading policy and advocacy group to ensure that Australia is the best place in the world for startups and scale-ups.
Hi, my name is Andy Tsao. I'm a managing director at Silicon Valley Bank. For those of you who aren't familiar with Silicon Valley Bank, we're the bank for the innovation economy here in the US. I lead a group at the bank called our Global Gateway that's been doing business development in new and emerging technology hubs around the world, including Australia.
Over to you, Adriana.
Adriana Gascoigne. I am the CEO and founder of Girls in Tech. We're a nonprofit that is based here in San Francisco, but we have chapters around the globe in 60 cities internationally, in 36 countries, and in 6 continents. And our focus is threefold: education, engagement, and empowerment of women in technology. So we help women excel in their careers in tech, as well as entrepreneurs and women that are at startups. So thanks for having me.
All right, so thanks very much to all of you for joining in what I understand it's a first, where we are connecting both Melbourne and San Francisco together, and it's a great pleasure to have three people that have been the embodiment of innovation. And let me start with innovation. Andy, I might throw to you first. You see a lot of innovation through startups and other opportunities that you get to fund. What is it in innovation that presents itself to you? Is it the person? Is it the product? Is it the service? What is it that initially attracts you to what people are doing?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Innovation, I think, is pretty broad these days, and that can be anything from intellectual property to traditional information technology. But today, equally, I think there's quite a bit of business model innovation that's happening as well. And I think it's the combination where IT and business models meet today that's really, really interesting, because I think technology is really transforming nearly every form of business in industry today. So innovation, Philip, as you described, I think can touch any of those areas.
Well, I might ask Rachel. Rachel, you've come from a couple of different ecosystems, from New York and Boston to San Francisco, and now here in Melbourne. How do you find innovation in different parts of the world? Does it mimic each other? Are there different strengths of different ecosystems? And what is it that you've witnessed that I guess brings everybody together as well?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I actually think that the most amazing transition that I've seen being here in Melbourne for the last 10 years has been the evolution of some early companies that were maybe fast followers of ideas that popped up in other ecosystems, to being the home of actual new rich ideas, whether that's new technology that's changing the way we do things, or as Andy said, new business models that's fundamentally changing the way that we kind of define a buyer and seller relationship. And so I've been really proud to see that Melbourne has become a really great hotbed for some of these fresh ideas. And it's less about idea arbitrage, but it's some homegrown innovation here in Melbourne.
And Adriana, you have amazingly brought different ecosystems together around diversity and inclusion. And I'm keen to see from your view of the world in that diversity prism, what is it about innovation that can bring people together?
Yeah, well, I've always said that the best products and services in technology are built by a very diverse group of people. So that is people from different backgrounds or expertise, people who've lived in different countries, know different languages, basically really understand different user behaviors and habits. And what I've noticed working at 12 different startups, starting my own company in Singapore and starting a social enterprise, Girls in Tech, is that the more we seek out really diverse groups of people from all walks of life, and that is also including our male counterparts, the better our products and services are, because it is all about creative problem solving. And you have different people with different backgrounds. They're going to bring different solutions to the table and innovate more effectively. So I found that diversity really breeds that, and we've really cultivated that type of growth and instilled those types of values in Girls in Tech. And we also instill those values in the startups that we empower and that we mentor. So through Amplify, our business pitch competition, we see a lot of diversity. Just this past week, we had a really large event, and we had over 360 applicants. These are female founders around the world come to, apply, and then the 10 finalists came to pitch. And we were just amazed at the products and services they brought forward. So from a product that integrated a cerebral palsy app so people can actually communicate with each other that have disabilities, or an application that helps blind people use an iPad. Things like that that are really changing the world can only really be created or innovated upon when you have a personal experience or personal passion. So we really care about that, not only from our staff perspective, but also from the events and programs that we produce at Girls in Tech.
So Andy, the big thing at the moment within Melbourne is all about augmented reality, really overtaking, in some respects, virtual reality, and growth in both investment, in jobs, and also potential VC investment. What is it at the moment that's trending for you, that's coming across your desk to invest in?
Yeah, certainly some of the newer technologies, as you described, Philip, like AR and VR, are interesting and continue to gain funding. I think some of the areas that we're seeing continued uptake in terms of investment, fintech is an area that gains a lot of attention and investment, not only in the U.S. but in other markets around the world, where financial services institutions, banks, for example, have been perhaps too conservative in the way they've operated, and have left room for entrepreneurs to potentially disrupt and disintermediate some of those businesses. So fintech, including new innovations such as cryptocurrency, and you layer in blockchain on top of that. I think we're in the early stages, but it's certainly an area that I think will continue to transform over the next coming years.
Andy, we're seeing fintech here in Melbourne just absolutely explode, and there's been some recent legislation here in Australia called the open banking policy that for the first time is kind of unlocking the customer data that used to be held up with our institutions. And here in Australia we have 4 major banks that covers most of the Australian population, and so it prevented a lot of innovation in that space. And now with the new open banking legislation and that data being able for the consumer to share with third-party applications represents such an amazing opportunity for fintechs here in Australia, and we're seeing the ecosystem respond accordingly. And every day I'm introduced to a new company in this space that's doing amazing things.
Adriana, I've got a question slightly moving off topic now. You, of course, have seen the introduction of Girls in Tech chapter here into Melbourne. I want to talk a little bit about ecosystems and building them. There are a lot of positives, a lot of great attributes to San Francisco, but there are some negatives in the way that the ecosystem has grown. And so from your experience, how is it that we can grow an ecosystem to be more inclusive, and what are the lessons that you've seen from many different ecosystems, and how can you channel that into building Melbourne to be a truly diverse and inclusive ecosystem as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've spent a lot of time in Melbourne over the past couple years, as you know, and that's for a reason, because I really do feel that it has some of the major elements, some of the major characteristics that really make up a thriving tech ecosystem. And that is some access to capital, really solid institutions, a great diverse group of people, so your talent pool is extremely diverse, and it's also a great place to live. So people really like and enjoy the city, and there's so much to do and there's so much to see. The weather is nice, rent and mortgages don't break the bank, at least so far, what I know of. And in San Francisco, and you can attest to this as well, Andy, the Bay Area it's impossible for entry-level engineers and other types of employees that really make the tech ecosystem thrive to actually find an apartment. Rent control is only for people who have lived here for a certain amount of time, so they have to pay around $4,000 USD a month to live in a one-bedroom shoebox, which is absolutely ridiculous, actually more than New York. So I think, actually, from my observation, that more and more people are venturing out to other tech ecosystems and cities that are thriving, just like Melbourne. And actually, the amount even of investments that are going into companies that start in San Francisco is decreasing. Investors are taking more risks in investing in entrepreneurs and startups outside of Silicon Valley. So I see that huge shift, and it's actually going to continue to grow, I believe, as the market here, the real estate market, continues to increase in cost.
Well, that's a great segue, because of course that's one of the reasons that we created the Melbourne Tech City campaign, to be able to demonstrate to employers, not just in San Francisco but right across North America, that when you guys are sleeping, we're awake. And of course, given our time zone, we're notionally ahead of the United States, if time zone notwithstanding. So that opportunity to take advantage of our talent as well is an important one. Andy, I just want to draw upon your experience in the VC world in relation to diversity. We've seen some terrible metrics right around the world about the lack of funding for female founders. And what can we do to ensure that we can provide a greater level of financing to not just women, but of course other people from minority groups that would otherwise find it harder? What do we need to do to really change that up? Because I think that if we're truly going to embrace those opportunities, we need to be as inclusive as we can be.
Well, it's a great question, Philip, and it's certainly an issue that's very important to us at Silicon Valley Bank. Clearly, there's the diversity here in the Bay Area. I think we share that with Melbourne. I think Adriana was talking about that to some degree, particularly as you look at, I would say ethnic diversity. However, when you boil down to startup funding, exactly the way you sliced it, the numbers are absolutely abysmal around gender diversity, and I think the number of female founders getting funded, as well as the number of investors who are female, is just a fraction. And I think there's recognition that there's an issue, and this is something that certainly won't be solved overnight. It's something that needs to be tackled, every day. Simply understanding your biases and being aware of some of those in your day-to-day behaviors as you're engaging with entrepreneurs is a place to start. And very simple steps that we've taken, for example, is simply to, as we do events, and we do quite a few of them for the startup ecosystem in the markets that we operate, is to be very inclusive and not to have any events that are, sort of the guys, right? Whereas maybe a decade ago that kind of behavior would have been perhaps more common, given the typical dynamics with the ecosystem.
Do we need to get a version of The Voice or Shark Tank where people are presenting to us without us being able to see who they are, to be able to give people more opportunity? Is it, in all seriousness, do we need to have blind applications to ensure that people are given a greater opportunity of funding, to ensure that inherent bias is removed from the process?
Yeah, I mean, those kind of things really make a difference. The studies have been done where whether it's the name that's attached to a CV or, as you suggest, perhaps the gender really biases the person considering the resume. And again, I think that's behavior that is not going to change overnight, but recognition and continued training on the topic, which is something that certainly many companies across the Bay Area have taken on, will help. But clearly, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well, I was at a panel with you, Adriana, in San Francisco, where you had a young woman of African American heritage talk about how important it was to have people of minority and of colour on the interview process as well.
Yes, Google actually does this really well when they're hiring employees. They basically make it mandatory for the panel of interviewers to be very diverse in terms of expertise and background, and also race and also age. So they really focus on creating this diverse panel so that one, the interviewee will feel more comfortable, and then two, you'll have different perspectives in how they rate or really identify or provide feedback on that interviewee. But I wanted to throw out a statistic based on what Andy said. I believe in the US it is only 3% of startups are female-founded startups are VC backed, and that number is actually extremely low, and we need to change that. And so with some of Girls in Tech's programming, we have something called Startup Breakthroughs. We're actually bringing this to Melbourne in 2019. It's a partnership with UC Berkeley and with Skydeck Labs, which is an incubator at Berkeley. We've customized programming to create really soup to nuts curriculum that helps with everything from product ideation, validation, customer discovery, how to pitch a VC. So we're really helping support with this educational backing.
So I might throw to Rachel, because Rachel, you've got experience of having lived in San Francisco in the US and then obviously 10 years now here in Australia in Melbourne. Tell me about your experience, both in terms of where our ecosystem is at and also the opportunity for both women and of course our minority groups to be able to not just access capital, but also to prove themselves as proper talent.
Yeah, I think that what Adriana and Andy said can somewhat be reflected here in this ecosystem, but I actually feel like we've come a long way. So just yesterday, the Fin Review here released stats around our venture capital funds here and what percentage of them are founded by women. And what we've seen is over the last, I think it's a 3-year window, that all but one fund has significantly increased their portfolio representation. And they're all hovering around the mid-20s to mid-30%, which is great. There's still plenty to go, considering that women are 50% of the population, but it's great to see that forward momentum. And I think that the more we pay attention to putting in place opportunities at every stage of that funnel, so like Adriana, filling that top of the funnel, having more women get involved in this space, and I think we do that by telling stories where people of all different backgrounds, so whether it's a gender thing or immigrants, people from other races, they need to be able to see heroes that look like them. And so the more that we can highlight and tell stories of people of diverse backgrounds, the more that other people can look up to them and emulate them. So I feel like we need to do better stories. I think that some of the positive things that I've seen here in Melbourne has been activating our new migrant and immigrant community. So I've seen a few great incubators. Some of them have been supported by Launch Vic, by the state of Victoria. And we all know, first of all, what a powerful force our immigrant and new migrant community is. They're incredible entrepreneurs. They are hungry. They obviously came here for a better life. And for us to be able to unlock that power through funding, through support, through training and skills, I think is going to have an amazing impact. And I think just that helps to have our startup ecosystem, which I believe is going to be the driving force of our economy, to be representative of what our community here in Melbourne looks like.
Yeah, for those watching, the equivalent of the Fin Review is the Wall Street Journal. So it is our national financial broadsheet, and so it's something that Rachel's right to reflect on. The point that I often make about Melbourne and Victoria is that we actually don't want to be San Francisco. We don't want to be Boston or New York or London or Berlin or Tel Aviv. We want to be Melbourne. We want to be known around the world for our inclusivity, our diversity, because from my perspective, if we can get that right, then we're going to have talent want to be here and work here. And we have some lofty goals and ambitions. We're limited by our size and scale, but it's great to hear Rachel's validation for the work that we've done, the work that you've done, Adriana, and Andy. I hope the work that you do in setting up a satellite office here in Melbourne to take advantage of the financial considerations and opportunities so that Silicon Valley Bank goes from strength to strength. Andy, did you want to make an announcement?
No pressure.
Well, I'm not ready to do that today, Philip, but it's certainly a market that we very much appreciate and excited about the innovation that comes out of Australia and from Melbourne.
No, look, Andy, that's great, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Adriana, you have had, again, a depth of experience that I'm extremely envious of, working with amazing people over many different cities. What is it about having come to Melbourne that has been able to attract your interest so much for you to continually return time and time again? Not just the minister, by the way. Well, let's move on to broader issues.
I'll keep the personal aside, and I think he's alluding to my partner in crime actually is Australian, so I left my heart in Melbourne, and I will be back next year. But it is, I believe I mentioned this earlier, it is a city that's extremely balanced. I actually, when I talk about the city, well, other than just glowing, I talk about how it has the best of Europe and the best of the US mixed into one. So it's not just business, it's the lifestyle. Because to me, and Andy can attest to this, we live in a very sort of myopic Silicon Valley where a lot of times it is, let's talk about our Series A or Series B, about tech, about the company we want to close. And while that is amazing, and that's one of the reasons I live here, and this is one of the reasons why Girls in Tech's headquarters are here, I think the diversity of the types of industries that exist and the type of people that exist within those industries help make, again, better products and services and innovate on another level, because we're exposed to different things and we have different friends and we have different conversations, right? So that, to me, that balance and exposure to different things actually is going to help, I think, Melbourne in the long run in building up its tech ecosystem.
I was going to say, Adriana, you have to be careful, because I fell in love with a Melburnian, and now 10 years later I have 2 kids who eat Vegemite. So anything can happen.
I actually love Vegemite.
Well, I might add that you have amongst the best coffee that you can get in the world in Melbourne. But I did want to make note that, at least from a sort of a geographic perspective, where obviously there's very strong linkages to what's happening here in the Bay Area, and the U.S. continues to be the largest innovation ecosystem in the world. But number 2, and by some measures, number 1 is what's happening in China, and so that sort of the location of where Melbourne is and Australia is to be able to really be part of the confluence of those 2 ecosystems, I think is really, really cool. And we've already seen, obviously there's money coming from Asia that's investing in startups increasingly in Melbourne and in Australia, and I think that's again a very unique situation that you're in.
Yeah, look, far be it from me to give a free plug, but it's a great opportunity for US-based firms that are looking to enter into the Asian market to set up in Melbourne and use Melbourne as a springboard, a platform into both Southeast and North Asia. I think it's a great point that you make about the opportunity, and I'll give you a stat that by around 2050, 60% of the world's middle class is expected to be living in Asia. So the buying power is going to be significant. And I think being able to utilise the best of ingenuity in the United States with the best of talent and being a springboard from Victoria will marry us up nicely. Now I'm being given the wind up, but before I ask the last question about the future and where you all think we're going, both here in Victoria and also there at home in SF and beyond, let me ask a slightly controversial question, and it will be difficult to keep your answers brief, but do your best. We have seen the sharing economy, as it brings people into the labour force with opportunity, take advantage of people by being able to price them low within a wage context, whether it be delivery drivers, whether it be Uber drivers or ride-sharing drivers through Lyft and other organisations. Is it incumbent upon people that are developing these apps, developing these new algorithms and systems, to also make sure that people that are workers in that industry can actually sustain and look after themselves, or is it really let the market decide? Might start with you, Adriana, before Andy, and finishing with Rachel.
Well, I mean, I'm an avid consumer of the sharing economy, and I'm going to continue to be because it's made my life so convenient. So, and I'm also a creature of habit, so that in effect, I'll keep on using it. But I believe the market demand also keeps the need for this now in our current lifestyles really high. So I don't think that that's going away anytime soon. But I do feel, as the CEO and founder of a nonprofit organization and being a person who's extremely empathetic to the human race, I feel like it is our obligation, and it is our obligation as well to hold companies accountable to create a good work environment for all employees. So whether it's benefits or training programs or policies or ways to keep their female employees safe, flexible work environment for mothers who want to return back into the workforce, things like that. I do believe it is our responsibility, because we should care. It's not just a money-hungry world we live in. It should be something where we do cultivate capitalism and good opportunities and great products and services to innovate and make people's lives more convenient, but also make sure that we are empathetic in our approach to the way we do business. And I think that will help everyone in the long run.
Andy?
Yeah, I agree with Adriana. I think the word that you used that stuck out with me, Philip, was sustainability. And I think even from a pure business perspective, if we can't have our employees make a decent living wage, then that over time that business model won't be sustainable. And the good news is that there's some recognition of that happening. I think our friends at Amazon announced a $15 minimum wage for their employees here in the U.S. And I think this is an issue that's something we really need to wrestle with, because if you think of the coming changes, not just with not just with well, I mean, when you think of the coming changes with artificial intelligence and the potential job dislocation there, we're going to really need to figure a way out for people to make a decent living wage and to distribute the wealth in a more fair way.
Rachel, what's your view?
Yeah, I think that what the sharing economy has actually held a mirror up to is that we no longer want to work in the same way that we have been for generations. I actually think there is absolutely a moral imperative for everyone involved to think about how can we maximize the opportunity and the experience for all sides of the marketplace. But I think with the gig economy and with flexible working environment, what we're actually seeing is a shift in a paradigm. And I think that it becomes a little bit of a false exploration if we're looking at the future of work through the current structure, because I think that what people are saying, workers and employers are saying, we don't want to adhere to these paradigms anymore. And so I think that a new conversation needs to be started that's not around minimum wage, because that is a construct of a factory or industrial setting. And instead we need to think about what are the things that matter to us: work, lifestyle, flexibility, autonomy, and how do we price that in a way that everyone has the resources they need to thrive, but also is maximizing other parts of their lives.
And I think that's a great point that Rachel makes about trying to price it in. And Andy, I'll look forward to another chat that we'll have another time about how Silicon Valley Bank potentially prices in your investments and about the return on that investment of a company or a startup that has employees and contractors that are well regarded and looked after versus other investments where that's not the case. But we'll have to do that another time. I'll just finish very, very quickly on that question about the future and where you think we're going, both as economies, as ecosystems, and also the ability for Melbourne and San Francisco to work more closely together. Andy, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the future is really, really bright. I mean, obviously we talked about some of the disruption, but if you look at the innovation side, I think we're really at the beginning of some incredible transformation. And the leading edge of innovation that's happening both here and in the San Francisco Bay Area and in places like Melbourne, again, I think when you look at the transformation in industries like fintech and what artificial intelligence is doing, not only in business but in healthcare applications, I think there's a tremendous innovation and positive change on the horizon. I think the other thing worth noting is that there's been some discussion here around the notion that innovation doesn't have to happen here in the Silicon Valley or in the Bay Area anymore. There's been a term coined by Steve Case, founder of AOL here, that talks about the rise of the rest. And while that term is kind of applied more to middle America and other parts of the US, I think that the same drivers that are happening to allow innovation to happen anywhere here in the US also is happening internationally. And I think based on the great entrepreneurs and innovation coming out of Melbourne and Australia, I think the future is very, very bright for both for Melbourne and for the Bay Area.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think that the ecosystems that have been dominant before do not have a monopoly on talent. They have better figured out how to provide resources, support, and opportunities. And I think the extent to which Melbourne and other cities can continue to provide that support and resources, then we become a magnet for talent and a breeding ground for homegrown talent. One of the things that I love about Australia, and I saw this in my previous roles as well as other companies, is that Australia is a great testing ground for new products and new services. And that's because consumers here behave much in the same way that we can predict consumer behavior in the US and the UK. But it's a smaller population, so we can take some risks. It's kind of far away, so that if we fail, no one really needs to know about it. And between 2 or 3 cities, you have access to 70% of addressable consumers. So when I think about Melbourne's future, I think that more and more companies who are going to come set up shop here are going to realize that this is an amazing test ground for some of their global products and services.
Yeah, so just on that point, we've seen, for example, Zendesk and Slack organically grow in Melbourne much faster and much quicker than anywhere in the rest of their marketplaces without any marketing spent. That was one of the reasons that attracted both of them to Melbourne as their Asia Pacific head office, because the organic growth in their customer base without having done any work in the city demonstrates what you just said, Rachel. Adriana, I'll throw to you so that you can have the last word.
Lucky me. Well, I would just add on to what they both said and what I've been observing within the Girls in Tech community as we see a lot of innovation in healthcare, med tech, and med device, and also in social goods. So a lot of apps and web apps, hardware and software within that, utilizing software and AI, machine learning, a lot of data science, aggregators. And this, I think, is a really, really crucial development in this stage of sort of the startup economy, because they're realizing that these very traditional, outdated industries, also, fintech, I don't mean to point to you, but just in general, they need to adopt new technologies in order to scale and optimize and provide access to people who really need it the most. And I do believe that as an organization, we're seeing that a lot of the technologies that are being created are for international use. So a lot of the devices that we see come through Amplify, our business pitch competition, can be used and deployed for very cheap production cost in emerging markets, right? So we had a little device to test early onset diseases like HIV, malaria, things like that nature in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. So we could ship them these little devices for $1, essentially. And so that has never been available to us until we've really started empowering these amazing innovators and really showing that these types of creations can be created anywhere and can be utilized in other places where they need it the most. So I'm all for the creation and sort of social good, healthcare, med tech places, things that are really helping solve some of the world's largest, most pressing issues right now.
Adriana Gascoigne, Andy Sale, Rachel Newman, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Melbourne Tech City and also a whole range of other conversations as well. You can see that it's nightfall in your backdrop, but in Melbourne, we're right in the middle of the day. So again, if there's anybody watching and they want to join Slack, Square, Zendesk, Etsy, Eventbrite, GoPro, Hired with choosing Melbourne for their ANZ or Asia Pacific headquarters, drop me a line and I'll be sure to get in touch. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ez.
you.